War returns to Europe. Russia has hit Ukraine on several fronts. There are urgent crisis talks as world leaders decide on consequences Russia should face. And correspondent Josef Federman says the threat facing Ukrainians is something they have almost been prepared for.
Yeah, it's a strange phenomenon what we've seen here, because on one hand, Ukrainians are very calm about this. This is something in many ways that they've been preparing for many years, for the better part of a decade, since Russia seized the Crimea in 2014. So the idea of dealing with the Russian invasion, I think, has been in the back of people's minds for a long time, and that may explain why you don't see massive lines of panic. And even in the past couple of months, leaders have been encouraging people to be prepared, to have a backpack with essential items, with travel documents and so forth. So on one hand, you see signs of kind of business as usual. Even in the past couple of days, you see traffic jams, you see stores open, restaurants and so forth. But now that it's become real, in the past 24 hours, you are starting to see more signs of people being nervous and even panicking. And, several major highways leading out of Kiev have been packed with traffic all day as people try to leave to what they believe are safer places.
More on this, researcher at the Australian National University, Dr. Leonid Petrov, joins us from Canberra. Dr. Petrov, of course, the invasion has happened, and with the benefit of hindsight, could we now say whatever could have been done, carrots or sticks, in the last few weeks, days, months, nothing would have changed the calculation that Mr. Putin had already made?
Well, it's a good question, because the first time President Putin engineered this conflict, this crisis on the Russo-Ukrainian border was just over a year ago, in March last year. Then there was a summit with US President Biden in Europe, in Geneva, and immediately after that, the US press started talking about imminent Russian invasion, the preparation of invasion against Ukraine, consolidation of forces, military drills. And just a few weeks ago, despite of all diplomatic effort, it looked like Russia was hell-bent on going to Ukraine anyway. The pretext for negotiations and diplomatic intervention was ostensibly the creation of the new collective security structures in Europe. Russia was paranoid about NATO expanding too close to Moscow, bringing NATO assets eastward without regardless of the promises which apparently were given to the former Soviet leaders back in the late 80s, when the Germany was permitted to reunify. And it looks like Russia is acting in good faith by protecting its national interest, but I don't buy it. I think the whole argument is just simply for the President Putin, because the whole decision of Ukraine invasion was made by one person, by Vladimir Putin. He did it despite of all warnings about possible imminent, terribly devastating sanctions against Russia. Still, he decided to go ahead. Why is he doing so? Well, he wants to stay in power indefinitely, and for that, he needs to consolidate population in Russia. He needs to destabilize Russia's neighbors and deflect Russian people's attention from dilapidating economy and from what Putin is trying to do on the domestic scene, the abrogation of human rights, poisoning and killing, imprisonment of dissidents and political rivals. So that's the result. So Ukraine is simply a pretext to avoid something similar to happen in Russia, to preclude any possibility of Russia becoming a democratic, free, and West-oriented nation.
Dr. Petrov, before this invasion, Ukraine had been bolstering its defenses, but by all accounts, it is outgunned, outmanned in comparison to Russia. President Zelensky has spoken to his people. He's been trying to boost their morale, saying anyone who wants a weapon will get one towards resistance against this Russian invasion. But what is your sense of what Ukraine can do now to defend itself? And for Ukrainians specifically, how willing are they to wage war?
Yes, indeed. Ukraine remains a weak state on many fronts, and military defense capability is just one of the problems. The issue was sensed first time back in year 2014 when Russia annexed the Crimean Peninsula without even firing a gunshot. The Ukrainian military simply laid the weapons and surrendered or left their positions. The eastern provinces of Ukraine had seen a much more violent resistance, and we saw the confrontation with the Russian regular troops, which pretended to be the local militia, but were weaponed with the regular army ammunition and anti-aircraft capability, which resulted in the downing of MH17 then in the summer of 2014. So these days, Ukrainian army looks much stronger. It's more populous. It's better trained and better funded, better equipped with Western and Turkish-made drones, for example. Great Britain and the US provided with lethal weapons recently. Former President Trump didn't do it, but President Biden decided to provide Ukraine with logistical support. What is potentially missing is the spirit to fight the Russians, because Ukrainians and Russians are united by family links, by friendships, by centuries of living together and fighting against common enemies, against the Napoleon invasion, the two German wars.
So, Professor, by invading Ukraine, what does Mr. Putin really want? Does he want to be a great restorer of Russian grandeur?
What President Putin really wants is to stay in power forever and ever, as long as possible. And for him, Ukraine is a major problem, which gives example for the Russian people and for the Russian opposition groups and human rights activists that Russians can live differently. They don't need to live in fear and constant suppression of their freedoms, freedom of speech, freedom of election. There's no independent courts. We know that Russia has many issues like Ukraine, corruption, the serious problems with its military apparatus and the security police abrogation of human rights. So Putin simply does not want Ukraine to pose an example for the Russian people, like, for example, Belarus did a couple of years ago when the Belarus population tried to vote the dictator out of the power. Putin does not want this to happen, and that's why anything what happens in Ukraine is considered to be hostile to Russia. Russians blame Ukrainian power to be a fascist junta, and so under this pretext, Russia sending troops, and despite of the promises not to occupy Ukraine, it's very likely that the occupation of Ukraine is going to follow, and the puppet regime is going to be installed, maybe not in Kyiv, maybe in Kharkiv or other eastern areas of Ukraine, but perhaps the western lands of Ukraine might be left intact. But who knows, if Russia decides with impunity to destroy statehood of Ukraine, they can do it to many other states.
Dr. Petrov, thank you very much for your thoughts on this. Dr. Leonid Petrov, the researcher at ANU in Canberra.